My mother passed away on a Tuesday in November, which somehow made everything worse. Tuesdays are supposed to be ordinary grocery runs and faculty meetings and forgotten dentist appointments. Not the day you lose the woman who taught you how to braid hair, how to make chicken soup from scratch, and how to love someone so completely it rearranges everything inside your chest. I'm Laura, and I'm 38 years old. I teach 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary in Columbus, Ohio, and for 12 years the most meaningful thing I've carried into every classroom has been the memory of my mother's hands, steady, warm, always reaching for someone who needed her. When she died, she left me very little in the way of money. She had never been wealthy, but she left me the thing she had treasured above everything else: a vintage sapphire pendant on a delicate gold chain, paired with a matching bracelet. 3 generations old. My great-grandmother had worn it to her own wedding in 1941. My grandmother had kept it wrapped in silk through 2 house fires and 1 cross-country move. My mother had clasped it around her neck the morning of my parents' wedding and worn it every anniversary after that, right up until the last few years when her hands got too unsteady to manage the clasp herself. On the last clear day she sat up in her hospice bed, reached for my hand, and pressed it into my palm. "Keep this close, sweetheart. It holds everyone we've ever loved." I cried for an hour in the hospital parking garage that night. Then I drove home, placed the pendant and bracelet in the velvet box my mother had always kept on her dresser, and put them on my own dresser beside our wedding photo. Every morning after that I touched the box before I left for school. It was the closest thing I had to still having her near me. My husband Daniel understood what those pieces meant. He had met my mother at Thanksgiving 11 years ago and loved her immediately, the way everyone did. She had that gift. He held my hand through the funeral, handled the estate paperwork when I couldn't stop crying long enough to read anything, and never once rushed my grief. I thought we were solid. I thought we had the kind of marriage that could survive anything. I was right about that eventually. But we almost didn't get there. The trouble started 8 months after my mother's funeral, when my sister-in-law Nicole moved back to Columbus after her 2nd divorce. Nicole is 4 years younger than Daniel, and she has always occupied a very particular space in his family: the baby, the beautiful one, the one everyone made excuses for. I had always found her exhausting in a way I couldn't fully articulate. She wasn't outright cruel. She was something harder to name. She was the kind of person who complimented you and left you feeling smaller afterward. The kind of person who asked questions that were really just a different shape of statement. The first Sunday she came over for dinner after moving back, she noticed the pendant immediately. I was wearing it that day. I had started wearing it on Sundays. A small ritual, and her eyes landed on it the moment I answered the door. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, stepping closer than was comfortable. "Is that what I think it is?" I took a small step back. "My mother's sapphire set," I said. "She left it to me." Nicole tilted her head, something flickering behind her eyes that I didn't have a name for yet. "Of course she did," she said sweetly. "It's just I remember your mom showing it to me once. At that Easter we all spent together. She told me about the history." What a special piece. She had met my mother exactly twice. I smiled and changed the subject. But it became a pattern. Every Sunday dinner, every family gathering, Nicole found a way to circle back to the pendant. She'd ask me to tell the story again, as though she hadn't heard it. She'd sigh and say things like, "Your mom really did have the most incredible taste," or "I can just feel the history in it when you wear it." Once, while I was helping my mother-in-law Carol clear the table, I looked up and saw Nicole standing in the living room, holding my purse open, peering inside. When she noticed me watching, she smiled and said she was just looking for a pen. I told Daniel that night. He rubbed the back of his neck the way he does when he's uncomfortable and said, "She's just going through a lot right now, Laura." Both divorces hit her hard. "You know how she gets sentimental about things when she's struggling." "I know how she gets," I said. "That's exactly what worries me." He kissed my forehead and said I was reading too much into it. I let it go, because I trusted him, and because I still didn't have anything concrete. What I had was a feeling. The particular cold feeling you get when something is wrong before you can prove it. The proof came 3 weeks later, and it came in the worst possible way. We had a Sunday dinner that felt different from the start. Nicole was quieter than usual. Her eyes kept darting to Daniel, then to my mother-in-law, then away. She had brought a bottle of wine she'd never be able to afford on her current waitressing salary, and she kept refilling everyone's glass with this particular careful attentiveness that I recognized, in retrospect, as someone building an audience. After the main course, just as Carol was getting up to bring out dessert, Nicole set her fork down and cleared her throat. She said she had something she needed to share, and that she'd been holding onto it for months because she didn't want to cause any pain. She reached into her bag and pulled out a handwritten card in a plastic sleeve. She laid it on the table. I recognized my mother's handwriting. My hands went cold. Nicole said she'd found it while sorting through some old things. Said my mother had mailed it to her the previous spring, a few months before she passed. She slid it toward the center of the table and said she thought everyone should see it, even though it was personal, because it felt wrong to keep something like this to herself. Daniel picked up the card. I watched his eyes move across it. His brow furrowed. Carol leaned over to read it, and pressed her hand to her mouth. "Oh, Laura. Oh, honey. I had no idea your mother felt this way about Nicole." I took the card. My mother's handwriting, unmistakably the looping L's, the way she crossed her T's low. But the words didn't sound like her. They read stiff and formal in places, warm and gushing in others, with odd shifts in tone that felt stitched together. The relevant sentence was near the bottom. "I've always wanted Nicole to have my sapphire set when I'm gone. She reminds me so much of my own sister, and I know she'll cherish it. My mother had a sister who died before I was born. It was the one wound she never fully healed from. Whoever had written this card knew enough to use that." "This is a forgery," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Nicole's eyes went wide, perfectly calibrated. "Laura, I know this is hard. My mother would never have written this. She told me explicitly. She pressed that pendant into my hand herself in the hospice room 2 days before she died." Nicole looked at Daniel. Then at Carol. She pressed her lips together like she was trying not to cry. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said softly. "But your mom and I had a real connection that I don't think you fully knew about, Laura. I don't blame you for being protective. I really don't. But this is her handwriting. I have the envelope with the postmark." Carol reached across and squeezed Nicole's hand. "Family harmony matters so much," she said, looking at me. "Laura, sweetheart, maybe for now. You're not seriously suggesting I hand over my mother's jewelry based on a card that was clearly tampered with," I said. I looked at Daniel. He didn't say anything. He was staring at the card with that same uncomfortable neck-rubbing energy, and the silence stretched long enough to answer me. I stood up, picked up my purse, said goodnight, and walked out. I sat in my car for 7 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. Then I drove to a Walgreens, bought a bottle of water I didn't want, and called my best friend from the parking lot. She talked me through breathing again. When I got home, Daniel came in an hour later. He sat on the edge of the bed and said he thought we needed to be open-minded. He said he wasn't saying I was wrong, just that we should consider the possibility that my mother had a side of her friendship with Nicole that I didn't know about. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I opened my mother's velvet box, took out the pendant and the bracelet, and locked them in the small fireproof safe we kept in the closet for documents. I didn't say another word about it that night. The next morning, I called the hospice where my mother had spent her final weeks. I spoke to a patient coordinator named Gwen who had been on staff during my mother's stay. I told her what had happened. She said she remembered my mother clearly, that I had been there almost every day after school. She said she would pull the visitor logs. While I waited, I started looking at the card more carefully. The postmark Nicole had mentioned put the mailing date in late April. My mother had been moved to memory care by March. By April, she couldn't hold a pen reliably. I had her medical records. I had visited her every single week. There was no version of reality in which my mother had written and mailed a card in April. That afternoon, Gwen called me back. She confirmed what I already knew. The visitor logs from April showed no visits from Nicole. Not one. The only regular visitor outside immediate family was my mother's friend from church. Then she said something that made me grip the phone so hard my knuckles went white. She said one of the nurses, a woman named Patricia who had been particularly close with my mother, might have something worth hearing. She said Patricia had mentioned something once but hadn't known whether to come forward. I drove to the hospice the next morning before school. Patricia met me in the break room with the careful posture of someone who has been holding something heavy for a long time. She sat down across from me, wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, and told me that in the month before my mother passed, she had received multiple phone calls at the nurse's station asking about my mother's condition, her lucidity, her daily schedule. The caller identified herself as a close family friend. Patricia had not given out any information, per policy, but she had noted the calls because they were so persistent. Then she told me the other part. She said that one afternoon in late April, a woman had come to the facility. She had not been on the approved visitor list. She told the front desk she was a niece from out of town and had been turned away. But Patricia had seen her in the lobby for several minutes first and had a clear look at her face. Patricia pulled out her phone and showed me a Facebook photo of Nicole at a family barbecue 2 summers ago. "That's her," Patricia said quietly. I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked Patricia if she'd be willing to put this in writing. She said yes without hesitating. That evening Daniel came home to find me at the kitchen table with a folder of documents. My mother's medical records showing her cognitive decline timeline, the hospice visitor logs, Patricia's written statement, and a side-by-side comparison I had typed up showing the tonal inconsistencies in the card. He sat down and read through everything slowly. I watched his face change. When he finished, he didn't rub the back of his neck. He folded his hands on the table and looked at me with something that was not comfortable for either of us, but that was true. "Laura," he said, "I'm sorry. I should have stood with you from the start. It was the right thing to say, and it mattered." But I told him that sorry had to mean something going forward, because I was about to find out how deep this went, and I needed him beside me, not behind me. He nodded. He said, "Tell me what you need." What I needed first was a handwriting expert. Daniel's college roommate worked in document authentication for an insurance firm. He owed Daniel a favor and agreed to look at the card informally. He came over that Saturday morning with a loop and a folder of comparison samples. I had kept several cards my mother had actually written me over the years. He spent 40 minutes examining everything. When he looked up, he said that in his professional opinion, the card Nicole had presented showed clear signs of composite forgery, authentic paper and envelope, authentic ink color, but the body of the letter had been written by someone imitating the original writer's hand. The imitation was skilled but broke down in the pressure patterns on certain letters. He said he'd testify to that if it came to court. That Sunday, Daniel and I went to his parents' house for dinner. We hadn't told anyone what we'd found yet. Nicole was there, wearing a cream blouse, pouring wine and laughing a little too loudly. She was performing ease, and now that I knew what I was looking at, I could see the performance clearly. Carol pulled me aside in the kitchen and said she was hoping we could resolve things peacefully. She said she knew it was painful but that family unity was the most important thing. I told her I completely agreed, and that was exactly why I needed to share something with everyone after dinner. Her eyes tightened slightly. "What do you mean?" I smiled. I said I just had a few things I'd like everyone to see together. Daniel's father turned on the television in the living room after dessert. Daniel asked him to turn it off. He said Laura has something she'd like to share, and the steadiness in his voice made Nicole set her wine glass down. I laid out everything on the coffee table, the visitor logs, Patricia's statement, the handwriting analysis, the medical records showing my mother's capacity in April. I walked through each item clearly, the way I walk third graders through a reading exercise, one piece at a time, no rushing, letting each thing land before moving to the next. Nicole's composure held longer than I expected. She said the handwriting expert wasn't official. She said the visitor logs could have errors. She said Patricia might be misremembering. Then Daniel opened his laptop and played a voicemail. He had called my mother's church friend, the woman who had actually visited her in those final months, and asked if she remembered anything. She had, in fact, recorded a voicemail my mother had left her in early April, which she had saved because it was one of the last times she had heard her friend's voice clearly. In the voicemail, my mother mentioned the pendant specifically. She said she had given it to Laura already, that it was where it belonged, and that she felt peaceful about it. The room went very quiet. Nicole stood up. She said this was a setup. She said we were ganging up on her during the hardest period of her life. She looked at Carol with those calibrated eyes, waiting for rescue. Carol looked at the coffee table. Then she looked at her daughter. "Nicole," she said slowly, "did you go to the hospice?" Nicole's jaw tightened. I was worried about Laura's mother. I cared about her. You weren't on the approved visitor list, Daniel said. You'd never spent time with her mother. So why were you so determined to get inside? That's when I asked the question I had been building toward all evening. I asked Nicole if she still had the original envelope the card supposedly came in, since she had mentioned it at the last dinner. The postmarked envelope. She said she'd have to look for it. I said that was fine, and that while she was looking, she should also know that we had filed a report with the Columbus Police Department that afternoon for fraud and forgery of a posthumous document. Daniel had made that call. He had sat at our kitchen table, picked up the phone and made it himself. Nicole went very still. Carol made a small, wounded sound. Daniel, she started. Mom, he said gently but without apology. She forged a dead woman's handwriting to steal her own sister-in-law's inheritance. There is no version of that where we pretend it didn't happen. Nicole sat back down. The performance was over. Without it, she looked smaller and very tired. She said the pendant was worth a lot of money. She said she'd gotten a quote from a jeweler who estimated the sapphire alone at several $1,000s. She said she had some debts, she didn't say how much, didn't say from what, and she thought she could borrow against it or sell the bracelet and keep the pendant, return it in a year when things stabilized. I looked at her for a long moment. You were going to sell my mother's jewelry to cover your debts, I said. And you built a forgery around a story you'd heard once about her dead sister because you knew it would hurt me too much to fight back. Nicole didn't answer. I told her I was pressing charges. Not because I wanted to destroy her, but because I had learned something in the past few weeks about what happens when you let someone like Nicole walk away clean. She walks straight into the next family and does the same thing. I wasn't going to hand that to someone else. The detective assigned to our case was a thorough woman named Marsh who had handled document fraud before. She took Patricia's statement, the handwriting analysis, and the voicemail. She requested Nicole's phone records and financial records. What came back over the following 6 weeks was worse than I had imagined. Nicole had not had 2 divorces, she had had 3, and in each case there had been disputes over property and personal items. One ex-husband had filed a police report about a missing coin collection that was never recovered. A former roommate had reported a stolen bracelet, a case that had been dropped when Nicole paid her back in cash. There was a consistent pattern, stretching back over a decade, of Nicole identifying things of value in other people's lives and constructing scenarios to claim them. She also had a gambling problem that her family had never acknowledged out loud. The debts were real, nearly $40,000, accumulated across 2 years. Carol sat in our living room one evening in December, 3 weeks after the police report was filed, and cried for a long time. Daniel handed her tissues and sat beside her and was kinder than she had been to me at that dinner, kinder than she probably deserved in that moment. Because that is the person my husband actually is when he isn't letting old patterns override his own judgment. Carol said she had known something was wrong with Nicole for a long time. She had chosen not to look at it directly. She said she was sorry for asking me to be the one to absorb it, and she said it the way people say things when they actually mean them. I thanked her. I didn't tell her it was fine. Because it wasn't. But I told her I understood that loving a child means sometimes not being able to see them clearly and that I wasn't holding it against her permanently. I meant that too. Nicole was charged with forgery of a private document and attempted fraud. She pleaded no contest 4 months later and received 2 years of probation, a fine, mandatory financial counseling, and a restraining order that kept her away from Daniel and me for the duration. Her attorney argued that her mental health struggles and financial desperation were mitigating factors, and I didn't dispute that in my victim statement. I just said clearly, for the record, what she had done and what it had cost me, not in money, but in the specific grief of having my mother's memory dragged through someone else's greed during the rawest year of my life. I said that grief has a particular texture when it's interrupted. That I had been in the middle of learning to carry loss, and someone had reached in and grabbed the thing I was using to hold on. I said I hoped she got the help she needed, and I meant that too, in the complicated way you can mean something and still be glad you didn't let it go unpunished. The sapphire pendant and bracelet are in the velvet box on my dresser again. I wear the pendant on Sundays, and sometimes on the days when a student is struggling and I need to remember why I show up. Daniel sees me clasp it and doesn't say anything, just puts his hand briefly on my back. We went to couples counseling for 4 months after everything settled, not because the marriage was broken, but because I needed to understand how someone who loves me could go quiet at the wrong moment, and he needed to understand it too. He does, now. That version of him, the one who sat across from his sister, and said there is no version of this where we pretend it didn't happen, that is the man I chose, and I'm glad I got to see him choose himself too. Some people have asked me whether I regret pressing charges. Whether it was too harsh, given the family fallout. Given that Nicole is clearly someone who is struggling and sick in ways that aren't entirely her fault. I've thought about it a lot. My answer is that mercy and accountability are not opposites. I can feel genuine compassion for Nicole's pain and still believe that pain does not entitle her to steal from grieving people. I can hope she rebuilds her life and still refuse to be the person who gave her a free pass to keep destroying others. The most loving thing I could have done for the next woman in Nicole's path was to make the call. What I keep coming back to, though, is something smaller than all of that. It's a Tuesday in November, and it's ordinary in the way terrible days always are before you know they're terrible. My mother is pressing something into my palm, and her hand is warm and her voice is steady, and she is telling me it holds everyone we've ever loved. I close my fingers around it. I don't know yet that in less than a year I will have to fight to keep it, that the fight will nearly cost me my marriage, that I will sit in a police station and describe my mother's handwriting to a detective while trying not to cry. I just know that her hand is warm, and that some things are worth every bit of what it costs to protect them. Have you ever had someone try to take something that belonged to you, not just a possession, but a piece of your history, and had the people closest to you hesitate before standing with you? And when you fought back, did the people around you call it too harsh, or did they finally understand? I'd really love to hear your experience in the comments, because I think more of us have been in this position than we talk about. And to anyone out there right now holding something precious and feeling like you're the only one guarding it, you're not alone, and you're allowed to hold on.